On today's Locked On Giants podcast, Kevin Borba of Locked On Buffs checks in with some intel on quarterback Shedeur Sanders, receiver cornerback Travis Hunter, and other Colorado draft prospects. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, big welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And folks, this is the show I think a lot of you have been waiting for. We are reviewing different schools' draft prospects. And on today's program, we are going to cover the Colorado Buffaloes with Locked On Buffs podcast host, Kevin Borba. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. The
All
eventful
right.
draft, right?
Yeah, we got a lot to talk about because Colorado's got a lot of draft prospects, including a couple that have been frequently mocked to the New York Giants. So on today's show, we're going to obviously talk about Shedeur Sanders. We're going to talk about Travis Hunter, and then we're going to talk about some of the other guys who might find their way into Giants blue after this draft is over. So Kevin, let's jump right in. We got to start with Shedeur Sanders, who's probably one of the most polarizing quarterbacks in this class. Let's start off with your take on what he brings to the table. What does he do well? What doesn't he do well? And, where does he fit in as far as, is he day one ready?
Yeah, I think the best thing about Shedeur Sanders is his toughness. I don't think it's a secret. His offensive line was terrible. He was sacked 94 times in 2 years in Colorado. So he only missed, I think, just one game. And I think most quarterbacks likely you would have noticed if they'd been sacked 94 times in 2 years. Like they would have had some weird body language, or they would have maybe subtweeted someone and been like, hey, would love to not be on my back 10 times a game, right? But Shedeur Sanders is tough. He never really said anything about it, played through it. He's smart with the ball. If he threw an interception, I think if you would go back and watch his tape, a lot of his interceptions were like the most bizarre you'd ever seen. Like he's very smart with the ball. Most of his interceptions were very like dependent on fluke things happening. Like the one that stands out the most is against North Dakota State. He threw it and a defender fell down and it bounced off his leg and like bounced right to his teammate. Like there's just very rare. He doesn't make mistakes, I guess. Like he is very calculated with the ball, which is obviously what you want in a quarterback who is possibly there to save the franchise, if you will, or be the face of the franchise. And then also he is really, I think, polarizing as a leader and as a person, but I think a lot of people like him, right? I think there's this notion that he's Deion Sanders' son, so he's cocky, he's arrogant, blah, blah, blah. We've seen the reports coming out of the combine where it's like he's brash, he's arrogant or whatever. But I think for the most part, most players really like playing with him and playing for him.
When you look at the mock drafts, and I know they're not, a true indicator, but you've seen him go as high as 1. You've seen him go down towards the middle of the draft. You've seen him not even in the first round of the draft. Is there something about his skill set that is causing this fluctuation, or do you think it's just because he's got this polarizing background?
Yeah, I think the thing that hurts Shedeur Sanders the most is, and this is a knock on most quarterbacks, is he's not Patrick Mahomes, he's not Josh Allen, he's not Lamar, he's not, you name a mobile quarterback that's going to beat you with his legs. He's not that, right? He is viewed as a traditional pocket passer, which is kind of ironic that nowadays that's like the bad thing is like, he's not Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes. It's like most people aren't. So unfortunately, we're going to have to deal with that, right? But I think it's just more so his skill set, right? I think he's more of a traditional passer who he can run. I think he's more athletic than people give him credit for, but he's not Cam Ward, who's going to throw it from all arm angles, right? He's just very methodical. And I think in a way we've come to a point in the NFL where we want our quarterbacks to all be Mahomes-like. And I think if we all wanted Mahomes-like quarterbacks, or if everyone wants Mahomes like quarterback, right? But there's only one Josh Allen, so it's very difficult. And then in terms of other reasons he's falling, I don't think it's his personality as much as I imagine him and his camp have teams that he wants to play for, right? His father has said multiple times he'll pull an Eli Manning, that is, if they don't like the team that is wanting to select him. And I think there's probably some behind the scenes stuff that we're not hearing, right? I think a lot of people thought that would be a very vocal production of like, they're going to say, I don't want to play for X team, or I don't want to play for this team because, and I think we kind of saw the only evidence we were going to see of this is at the combine when certain teams said he didn't seem absolutely interested with interviewing with them. So I think maybe just the reason he's fallen is certain teams don't really reach the Sanders requirements where it's like they want to play for them.
That's excuse me. That's not something new. Obviously, you mentioned Eli. I think John Elway's father did it. And we've seen, other instances of that. But that being said, Dion is can be a polarizing figure himself. Do you think his involvement in this case is maybe hurting him? Because this is not a quarterback-rich class by any stretch of the imagination compared to last year. So do you think Dion's, guidance, if you will, is that hurting Shedeur or helping him?
I think it's helping him. I think, at least for the most part, Deion Sanders is really dialed into the NFL. He has a lot of connections everywhere. And so if he sees a franchise that he doesn't view as being a good landing spot for his son, we talked about the quarterbacks who have done this, where it's like, we're not going to play. It's a very rare group, right? It's not like every year there's a quarterback who's like, I'm not playing for this team, because most of the time these prospects, this is like the biggest deal in their life. Like, this is their biggest job interview. This is like, oh my gosh, I've been dreaming about this. And I'm not saying Shedeur hasn't, but most prospects don't have a father who could influence the draft, right? Eli Manning had Archie Manning. John Elway had his father, and he also had baseball. I believe he was saying that he was going to go play baseball instead. And Shedeur has Deion Sanders, right? That's 3 quarterbacks in the last 20-something years that have been able to do this. So I think it helps Shedeur end up in a place where they want him to. That being said, I think if he does fall a little bit and maybe they weren't interested in those teams, I think it'll hurt from that perspective of like he won't be a top 3-ish or 4 pick. But if he ends up where they think is a good place for him, I don't think that's really a loss in their eyes.
Another knock on Shedeur has been he's played primarily, he's been coached primarily all his career by his father. So his father's created this ecosystem, if you will. Has that ecosystem, have you seen it evolve, or has it kind of been the same thing? Because I guess another concern with him is, has he kind of been pigeonholed into a specific system to where if he goes to another team that doesn't quite match that system, now his effectiveness might not be a good match?
Yeah, I think that'll be the tough part, right? I don't think he's played football for someone who wasn't his dad since I know he played for him in high school, so maybe even pre-high school is probably the last time he's played for someone who wasn't his dad. And don't quote me on the exact year, but I know he was playing for his father in high school and then at Jackson State, and Colorado as well. So it'll be interesting, right? I think this will be the first time in his career, at least the first time in quite a while, that he's played for someone who wasn't his father. I think that brings challenges, right? I think the challenges, but it's not challenges that people think. I think the most of the time when we think of that, it's like, oh my gosh, can he handle coaching, right? I think Coach Prime in the sense is very hands-on with the program, but at the same time, he's not the offense coordinator. It was Pat Shurmur. You guys are familiar with Pat Shurmur, right? So it was Pat Shurmur. It was Sean Lewis, who is now the head coach at San Diego State. And then you had a few coordinator changes at Jackson State. And so the only thing I would think would be the biggest difference for Shedeur is he's going to have to do more adjusting at the NFL level, right? I think the one thing that maybe playing for his father impacted him in one way is they changed a lot of offensive coordinators. I think he played for, I want to say the numbers 4 or 5 different coordinators in his college career. And so he played 4 seasons for a handful of different coordinators, right? So that's very different. So I think that could be the challenge, but I think he's willing to be coached, which is the good thing. I just think that teams may have to figure out the best way to maximize him, because the one thing that playing for your dad helps you with is your dad knows exactly what you're good at. And so they tailor the offense to his skill set. So I think that could be the biggest challenge, is sort of figuring out what he's comfortable with and kind of determining that on your own.
Every rookie that comes to the NFL has to adjust and acclimate. When you look at Shedor's game where it is now, what do you think is the biggest thing he's going to need to kind of smooth over in order to be considered a day one starter?
Yeah, I think day one starter is going to be a tough thing to find in this draft, right? I think Cam Ward is viewed as like the definitive top quarterback, and he'd be like QB5 in last year's draft. So I don't really know if like anyone in this class starts day one if they're meant to, if it's just out of necessity. That being said, if Shedeur Sanders had one thing to really focus on, I would say it's how long he holds onto the ball. I did say he was sacked 94 times in the past 2 years. Now, I'm not going to say that half of those were his fault, but there's a large chunk where he's trying to make plays or he's trying to extend the play, and rather than taking off and run, he's kind of working his way back, and all of a sudden he's getting sacked and he's forced himself to be sacked. So at the NFL level, you don't really have the chance to hold on to the ball as long, right? It's 1, 2, 3. If you don't have the read, you have to go, or you have to run or throw it away, whatever it is, take your check down. And I think that's his biggest flaw is not Superman syndrome where he's like trying to be Caleb Williams and run around and scramble around for 5 minutes, but he does have this tendency to hold on to the ball like a second too long or a second and a half too long, and that's led to a bunch of sacks. So at the NFL level, you don't want to be taking that many sacks because obviously the defense linemen are much bigger and stronger, and it's just one of those things where it'll impact your game in a negative way and make people lose confidence in you if you're getting sacked all the time.
All right, now final question on Shedeur before we get on to Travis Hunter in the next segment.
Yeah.
What about the X factors with Shedeur? You mentioned a little bit about, you think he's willing to be coached, but how was he with his teammates, the locker room? And then I think another concern, whether it's justified or not, is that he's too concerned about promoting his brand as opposed to being a football player. Have you seen any indication of that? And how overall is he kind of received in the locker room?
Yeah, I think the locker room loves him, honestly. I think it's partially because he doesn't show this as much, but he'll take his offensive lineman out to dinner, right? He's bought and stuff for his teammates. He's helped his teammates in a lot of different ways, right? He's willing to work after practice with them. He's willing to mentor the younger guys. And so he's not just this figure or this, I guess, yeah, I would say he's not just a figure in essence, right? I think when we see or think of Shedeur Sanders, we see the watch, we see his brand, like he has a little logo. We see all of the things where it's like, okay, this guy really seems to only care about himself, but I think he puts in a lot of effort to be a good teammate. And I just don't think that is what drives clicks, and that's not what drives articles, unfortunately, about him. Now, there have been moments like on the field where people perceive him as cocky, but I would say the most part, he has been a great teammate, right? I've only seen one like really not great review on him from another teammate, and that guy was kicked off the team. Like not because of that, but he was kicked off the team and then started throwing shots at the program. So I don't really know if that's the best source to go off of. But I think he's really down to earth in a way, right? As down to earth as he can be. In terms of his brand, I would say his brand is important to him. That being said, I don't think he will think his brand is bigger than the program, but I also think if you're an NFL team, you kind of have to know that you're getting someone with the brand, right? That's a really big deal these days for a lot of these athletes is they're all coming in as millionaires, right? So they're all coming in with some sort of entitlement, or they're all coming in with some sort of brand development already. So I think teams should probably be used to players with brands. His happens to be a little bit bigger than most, but I don't think it hurts to have a little bit of marketability.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk Travis Hunter, the two-way generational star, with Kevin Borba of Locked On Buffs. Hey, Giant fans, the Armada Player of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, we're taking a look at our draft prospects to pick one guy that stands apart. The guy we believe showcases the strength and power needed to push the New York Giants forward as we look ahead to the next season. This week's Armada and clear-cut Player of the Week is Colorado cornerback / receiver Travis Hunter. When it comes to first-round value, Hunter is as good as it gets. Besides being a potential playmaker on a Giants defense that struggled to create turnovers last season, Hunter's versatility and heavy-duty play style leaves the door wide open for him to potentially contribute in select packages on offense. Adding Hunter to the Giants roster is like getting 2 first-round players for the price of one, which is a value that just can't be topped. And speaking of which, when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. And that's exactly what I think Travis Hunter can do for the Giants. It's clear that our player of the week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and my guest today is Kevin Borba. He is the host of Locked On Buffs, and we are talking Colorado because, hey, there's a very good chance that somebody from that program is going to be in a Giants uniform in a few weeks. So, Kevin, let's talk about Travis Hunter. All right, another guy who's kind of polarizing, but in a different way, because is he a cornerback? Is he an NFL receiver? Can he do both at this level? What's your take on where he best fits at the next level?
Yeah, I have a very unpopular opinion about this take. I think he can play both ways. I think he's better suited to play wide receiver. I think he's best when the ball's in his hands, right? I think he's a playmaker. I think when you get him in open space, he's really hard to bring down. He's very shifty, and he's an exciting player, right? And I think it doesn't hurt to have 2 elite receivers or 2 very good receivers like the Giants would have with him and Neighbors. And so I like him at receiver for, like I said, his ball skills. And then I also look at it from career longevity, career money wise. Like receivers are paid more. I think you could have a longer career as a receiver. You could be healthier. He has been banged up a couple of times in the past 2 years. So I don't really know if playing both ways is in the cards. I think if he does play both ways, it's going to be one of those things where they pick a position that's his primary position, and then he kind of dabbles at the other thing. And so I think that's as close as it's going to get to 2 ways. And then I don't see that lasting very long because at the end of the day, whatever team he goes to, whether it's the Giants or someone else, I think they're going to want him to make a maximum impact. And I don't know if you could do that if you're on a pitch count or if you're just only in certain packages, right? I don't think you spend a top 5 pick on someone to only play, say, 20 plays on this side of the ball, right? But I think he is gifted enough and talented enough to do it. I just don't think it makes sense. So I like him at receiver. I think he's really good with the ball in his hands, and I think receivers make a lot more money. And so at the end of the day, a lot of these guys care about money. So that's what I would do.
Okay, well, let's break down what each position he plays. Tell me about. We'll start with cornerback. Where does he excel at cornerback, and where is he still kind of developing that part of his game?
Yeah, as a corner, I think this is what makes it so challenging to decide is he's a really good corner, right? I think most people view him as a generational corner and then a Pro Bowl receiver, which I mean, for that to be your sort of ceiling as a receiver or your entry into the NFL, a Pro Bowl as a rookie, I feel like that's pretty good, but he's viewed as a generational corner. A lot of people would go back to, I would say my favorite moment of him is against UCF. So they were playing UCF. He was in a zone coverage and he like perfectly baited the quarterback into throwing to what looked like a wide open tight end and then came virtually off the screen if you were watching on TV and like made a diving interception. So he's great in coverage. I don't really think there's anything to work on for him except like just man coverage against bigger receivers, right? He's not the biggest guy. And so I think he's just going to have to get a little stronger. That being said, he's a great corner. I just personally like him as a receiver better, but I don't think there's a lot of room for him to grow. There's a reason that Richard Sherman, I think Patrick Surtain and other corners before him have said, we want him as a corner because he's that good. It's just, he happens to play 2 of football's most difficult positions, and he happens to be really great at both of them.
What about his game as a receiver? Where is he at his strength? What's his strength and where can he get about?
Yeah, his strength is one, and I think Deion Sanders said this recently, is when you throw a 50-50 ball to Travis, it's not really a 50-50, right? It's more so like 70-30, 60-40 in his favor. He's going to come down with it. He's not the biggest guy, but at the same time, he is super athletic and will out-jump anybody, outrun anybody. In terms of what he needs to work on, I would imagine the more time he spends at being a receiver, like the more polished his all-around skill set would be. I don't think there's anything that stands out where it's like he's not a good route runner, he's not good with the ball in his hands, because he's great at, or he's really good at those things. I just think that the more time he focuses on all that stuff, he could be more well-rounded. I would say availability, maybe, like obviously if he gets injured, that hurts him regardless of where he's playing. So maybe just availability. It's not really anything he could control, though. I think he's done enough. He works really hard.
Given his size, though, I mean, part of the receiver game is you got to block. Can
Yes,
he? You think
that could be actually that could be a good one. I think he's a willing blocker, so I think NFL teams could work with that. In terms of being an effective blocker, that will be a TBD at the NFL level, because obviously it gets very violent and aggressive up there, right? So I think blocking could be like the one thing where I'm not saying he's not good at it, but I do think that could be his biggest adjustment in the NFL.
Did they have him run the entire route tree at Colorado?
I would say so. Their offense was they had 4 NFL caliber receivers, so he could kind of do a little bit of everything. I think he's about as experienced as a route runner as you can get. And the thing with Travis too is everyone knows he's the focal point of the offense, and so he's still making plays with everyone trying to sort of cater their defense to him. But I would say he's a pretty well-versed route runner.
In terms of how, if he were to come to the Giants,
Yeah.
obviously about Malik's Neighbors.
Yeah.
How do you think his skill set would complement or help Malik Neighbors?
I think that'll be an interesting dynamic because, for one, I imagine Malik Neighbors would be willing to have help, but at the same time, we all know wide receivers are a little territorial, right? I guess we could call them that, where it's like, I want to be the first guy. I want to be the first read. So I think Travis could be very complimentary. I think that the thing about Travis is he's like a bundle of joy as a human. Like he just seems like he's always having fun. Like I don't think I've ever seen anyone in the NFL or college football wise who seems like they're having as much fun as him. So I think he would be a fun teammate to have for Malik Neighbors, because it's going to open more things up for Malik, because obviously if there's someone else to focus on, then he's going to be open as well. So I think he could complement him in any way they need, right? Brian Daboll is a creative mind, and I think you figure it out, right? I think you figure out how to use 2 possibly generational talents on offense. It's not really something that I would say you guys have had at least at the same time in the past few years. So you figure out a way to use Travis. I think he complements Malik, and I think, assuming that no one gets their feelings hurt about the other guy, they should have one of the best receiver cores in football.
All right, and what about X factors with Travis? Unlike Shedeur, who's kind of been in the spotlight for most of his life, I don't. Travis more so. I think the last few years, coming to the New York market, that's a huge adjustment for anybody, even if you've been in the spotlight. How do you think Travis would take to that? And what are some other X factors? His locker room demeanor, how coachable he is. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think starting with the coachable thing, Travis is probably as coachable as it gets. For those that don't know, he was the number 1 recruit in his class and then went to Jackson State he was committed to Florida State. And at the time, I think that was probably probably still is one of the craziest signing day flips. I would say 70% of people had to Google what Jackson State was. It's an FCS program, HBCU, that not the average college football fan was familiar with. And he went there because he wanted to be coached by Deion Sanders, someone who played corner at the highest level, someone who played both ways at the NFL a little bit. And that's exactly what he wanted to do. In terms of how he fits in New York, Travis is a personality, right? He has a very active, I think it's Twitch channel where he's streaming. He has a podcast. So I think he's very used to the attention. In terms of locker room adaptability, I think everyone loves him. His whole team supported him a ton when he won the Heisman. So he's very likable. I think he's very coachable. In the New York market, it shouldn't be something that scares him away, because at the end of the day, he's going to be himself. And whether New York Giants fans like who he is, I don't know, right? The Travis Hunter that I think most fans fell in love with is the one who's playing video games in a Lilo and Stitch onesie, right? He's wearing a Lion King onesie or whatever, Monsters Inc. onesie, where he's like, I think it's Mike or Sully. I guess it would be Sully. He has like a Sully hoodie on, right? So he's fun. And I think he's not going to be your traditional pro where you never hear much from him. And he's going to be himself. And himself is a fun-loving guy who's very okay with being who he is. And I think if you're in New York, you have to be okay with who you are, especially when things get tough. And I think he'd be okay there.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about the rest of the Colorado Buffaloes, and they've got a lot of guys and some interesting names. Giant fans, stay tuned. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. My guest today is Kevin Borba. He is the host of Locked On Buffs. We are talking Colorado Buffaloes, and we just finished talking about the top two guys in the draft class, Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. And now we're going to talk about some other names that maybe we're not hearing a whole lot about, but maybe we should. So, Kevin, I'm going to open the floor. Tell us some of the names that we're not hearing enough about, but probably should.
Yeah, I think the name that I heard the most positivity from at the East-West Shrine Bowl coming out of the NFL Combine was LeJohntay Wester. He's a wide receiver he came over from Florida Atlantic, where he had, I think it was like 100-plus catches in 2023. And he said at the NFL Combine the reason he went to Colorado was because he wanted to show NFL teams that he could be a role player. He could be a guy who sort of just does whatever the team needs. And I like that mentality. I think he went in not thinking that he would be the guy. And although Travis Hunter was there, LeJohntay Wester was like a close 1B, right? He's a spark plug. He returned a punt for a touchdown. There was multiple games where Colorado was notorious for getting off to slow starts, and it felt like he was always the catalyst for them sort of finding their groove. And so he's a little bit on the smaller side, but he's extremely quick. Very savvy with the ball in his hands, and can obviously make an impact on special teams, which I think for a lot of these guys at the NFL level, that's how you get in, right? You don't get to just dive into being wide receiver 2 or 3. You sort of work your way on special teams, and then from there, you see your snaps increase. Another guy would be Jimmy Horn, also a wide receiver. You're gonna see that a lot with this class from Colorado. There's a lot of receivers. Their entire receiver core is declared or had declared for the NFL draft. So there's 4 Colorado receivers out there that are hoping to hear their names. Jimmy Horn was another guy. Same thing at the East-West Shrine Bowl. Teams loved him. I thought he would run a faster 40-yard dash time, but I just don't think he's one of those guys that like specifically train for it. So I think on the field, he's one of the fastest guys. And same thing as LeJohntay, a spark plug guy. His only problem, he had a couple drop issues, but he quickly figured that out, and he was a little banged up this past year, so we didn't get to see a lot of him. And then defensively, everyone needs a pass rusher, and BJ Green is that guy. He was an all Big 12 selection the past 2 years, last year Arizona State. He's versatile. You can move him across the defensive line, and he gets to the quarterback. And at the end of the day, that's what gets you paid in the NFL, is getting to the quarterback.
All right, a couple guys you didn't mention that I'm kind of curious about. Wide receiver Will Shepard, and then I believe he's a safety, Shiloh Sanders, who I believe is Shedeur's brother.
Correct, yeah. So I'll start with Will Shepard. He's a guy that I really thought would get a combine invite. Obviously, this receiver group is very, not going to say loaded this draft class, but there's a lot of names out there. And so Will Shepard, big body guy, 6'2". When you watch him or look at him next to pretty much everyone that's in front of him, he looks bigger and stronger than everyone. He's just a ginormous guy. He is someone who I would say had drop issues in the past. Kind of at one point, Colorado fans didn't want him to play because he had a crucial drop. I think it was in 2 games in a row. But he figured it out, right? He sort of worked through it. He's a jump ball guy. I would say I thought I would see more Will Shepard hype this pre-draft process, and I just haven't. And so clearly there's something that teams feel like he needs to work on, whether it's his route running or his separation. But I do think that he is a guy, if you give him an opportunity for a 50-50 ball, there's a good chance he's coming down with it. And that's where Colorado sort of helped him find his confidence, was in those scenarios. And then Shiloh Sanders, it's an interesting case, right? You mentioned Shedeur's brother. It's his older brother, plays a similar position as his father. Obviously, he's not a corner, but he's a defensive back, and we don't hear much about him. And I think I'll talk about the positives. He's energetic. He can hit extremely hard. I don't know who gave him the nickname, but he goes by the CEO of the Headache Gang, as in like he's going to give someone else a headache because he hits them so hard. And I think he's willing to cover, which is obviously his position, so or part of his job. but I don't really know if he's always in the right positions, and I don't know if he's got the athleticism that his father has, which, I mean, shocker, Deion Sanders was a generational athlete who played 2 sports professionally, so not many people do, but I think Shiloh Sanders will be an effort guy. I don't know if he's going to hear his name called. I think if he does, it'll be in the later rounds, and I think he's going to have to carve out a role on special teams, which a lot of these guys will, right? I think, and you could attest to this, most guys are not going to walk into an NFL locker room and be in the 2 deep, right? They sort of have to find their way onto the roster, and from there they figure out a way to find a role. And so I think Shiloh doesn't get a lot of hype. I think he gets a lot of hate, which I think a lot of the hate is due to the fact that he's Deion Sanders' son and isn't Deion Sanders, which is an unfair standard, right? If we looked at any, say it was quarterback or receiver, running back, and we go, you're not good, you're not Emmitt Smith, or you're not good, you're not Joe Montana, right? I think we'd have a lot of different perspectives on certain people, but obviously because it's his father, I think he takes a lot of unnecessary criticism. That being said, I don't really know if he's as polished as a prospect as most would hope.
All right, Kevin, final question for you. Of the Colorado draft prospects not named Travis Hunter and not named Shedeur Sanders, who's the one that you think is really going to surprise people? Maybe he goes higher than people are anticipating. Maybe he goes on to have a really good NFL career. Who do you see as being that quote unquote dark horse, if you will?
Okay, yeah, I think I could give you like 2 because the second one's not going to be exciting. Punter, Mark Fassett, Australian guy, really good punter. But I know that's not what people came for. I would circle back to LeJontay Wester. Honestly, he's undersized. I think just his whole demeanor. I interviewed him at the East West Shrine Bowl, and Patricia, I'm sure you've interviewed plenty of players, and they're all usually cordial. They're all usually friendly, right? But like he seemed like he genuinely wanted to talk to me, and obviously it's nice when I guess that's reciprocated, where it's not just like a transactional thing where they're just like, okay, I did that, now I'm done. Like we talked after the interview, he got to know me a little bit. Super nice guy. I would say he flew under the radar in the sense that Travis Hunter was there, Will Shepherd transferred in from an SEC program, and yet he was the guy that was consistently making plays. He was a guy that at the East West Shrine Bowl probably could have sat out because he had practiced so well, but he wanted to play. He's a guy that is willing to do whatever it takes for his team to win. And I think he'll make an impact on special teams. And then all of a sudden he'll probably be your team's second or third best receiver. And you're just like, where did this guy come from? And he's sure-handed, nice guy. And I think he's going to be a really good pro.
All right. Sounds exciting. Colorado's got a really, really rich representation in this year's draft class. Kevin, appreciate all the insight. He's Kevin Borba of Locked On Buffs. Do check out his work. I'm sure he's going to be covering aspects of the draft as players go. And be sure to check out all of our college hosts. They do such a fantastic job. And I know I appreciate their insight because they know these guys better than we do at this point. So that's why we have them on. Giant fans, I want to thank you for tuning into the Locked On Giants podcast. Be sure to keep it here. We are still 5 days a week as we inch closer to the NFL draft and we get the answers that we're all waiting for. For Kevin Borba, I'm Patricia Traina. Giant fans, I'll see you tomorrow.